History Channel for our special New Year's live Q&A. Ask me anything. Where for the next hour or so to end the new year, I will be answering all of your questions, comments, and topics, history related and social studies related, geopolitics, past and present. We do this usually every Friday and Saturday, but we decided to do a special one just to give back to all of our wonderful subscribers and everyone who comes onto the channel and asks all sorts of great questions. And we have all sorts of great discussions. Um, and had a really great year, and I've really loved getting to know all of you in 2024. This is our inaugural year. Our year anniversary actually will be coming on President's Day weekend in February. We've got some special events and plans for that. But yeah, pull up some coffee, grab something sweet to eat and hot to drink, and join us for this special holiday Q&A. Ask me anything, where you can ask me anything about holidays, history, social studies, geopolitics, past and present. It's what we do here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Usually every Friday and Saturday evenings. Start your weekend off on Fridays with asking about some history, learning about some history, and just enjoying yourself with good vibes and some fun. We keep that going on Saturday as you continue before you go out and party and enjoy your Saturday evening and weekend. We all have a lot of fun then as well. And Sundays, we do our live stream lecture. We did a previous one this last weekend about the history of Hanukkah that was really enjoyable. And this one, coming up Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, will be our live stream lecture concerning the French Revolution. And I'm really looking forward to talking about that with all of you. But here we are, the last day of 2024, and I wanted to share at least part of my day with you, my wonderful YouTube community, where you guys get to ask me anything you'd like about history and social studies, the humanities. That's what we do here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. We talk about historical trends, cultural identity, the connections that make history relevant between the past and the long past, the near past, the present, and we talk about the way the world works and why it works that way because of what's happened in the past. So if you like learning about history and social studies and you're new to the channel, consider liking and subscribing. Joining and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian is as easy as doing that. My social media handles are in the chat, provided by my wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny. And for the next hour or so, we will be bringing you as much history content as you would like, as to your heart's content, asking and answering as many questions as you would like. Hi, nice to see you. Best and worst king in history. So we've already got a good question here from Alfeo. Ryan, good to see you here. Yes, we actually started a little bit on time today, believe it or not. And Simon the Bunny has my social media handles in there. So we've already got some good questions. Make a sandwich, please. I'm not in the kitchen. It's kind of hard for me to make a sandwich. I don't even like sandwiches that much. I mean, usually stuff like that. Are the Bills playing today? I didn't know, and I wasn't paying any attention. But my Steelers are struggling. I know that, but I am not worried about it that much. Playoff bound. We'll see what we can do in the playoffs. So Alfeo is asking a great question, and this is what you can do. You can ask me anything you like about social studies, history, geopolitics, past and present. Is what we do here at our live Q&As, AMAs, and we have a special one today to end the year off. And I'm so glad that you chose to partially end your year on New Year's Eve with me today. Really appreciate that. Consider liking and subscribing to become a friendly neighborhood historian. So, best and worst king in history. Oh, that's a tough one. I just did a video on Commodus, the Roman emperor, who was so terrible that the commode, the literal toilet, is named after him. That's how bad of a ruler he was. That's how much damage he did to the Roman Empire. It's hard to pick because there's so many terrible rulers in history. Elagabalus basically turned the Roman palace into a giant orgy space, did nothing to reign, and was eventually assassinated like many emperors at that time. Um, the worst king is hard to pick because there's terrible kings in every single place you can pick. Every single country has a really bad king who basically ruined his country and made everything a lot harder. Charles VI in France went insane and basically allowed the English to conquer almost all of his country, including Paris. He's the only French king who lost Paris to the English, which is amazing to believe. The center of French life and culture belonging to the English crown. Charles was basically forced to sign over his kingdom and his domain to Henry V of England. There's an example of a worst king. In English history, it's almost undoubtedly John Lackland, the villain from the Robin Hood legends, who was so bad that he lost all of the land, a huge amount of the land that England had acquired over the decades in France. He bankrupted the country. He had his nobles turn on him, was forced to sign the Magna Carta, basically limiting the power of the king, and basically had to sell England to the dominance of the papacy, where Pope Innocent III controlled English politics and affairs and actually put a suspension on all church services for several years called an interdict in England. That's how bad he was. So John Lackland, Charles VII, Emperor Elagabalus, these are some rulers that come to my mind. Um, Victor Emmanuel III in Italy basically let Mussolini do whatever he wanted and then was supplanted, and then the Italians got rid of their monarchy pretty much altogether after that. That was how bad it was. Nicholas II ruined Russia's prestige by basically giving court to Rasputin, did not handle the economy properly, basically tried to rule as an absolute monarch when everyone was demanding democracy, elections, and reform. Tried to keep Russia in that old state of being and then embarrassed them through their technological disadvantages in World War I, which eventually led, of course, to them being absolutely obliterated by the Germans, and he was forced to abdicate and eventually killed by the Bolsheviks. So those are some guys who are definitely some of the worst monarchs in history that I can think of off the top of my head. So anyways, so the world was created 4.2 billion years out of comic dust, and time is infinite, so our existence is a blip of a second. Yes, life is precious, life is short, time flips, goes through like a sand through a sea. This is why the hourglass is usually used to represent time. Trash boats, so make the most of it. Like and subscribe to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Okay, so Ryan, you've got some good. Oh, is my mic being muffled? Where is my microphone? Oops. Let me see here. Where'd my microphone go? I hate it when this happens. Let me just go
all natural. Okay, hopefully you can hear me a little bit better now. But basically, let me see. Hopefully you guys can hear me a little bit better. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Can you guys hear me now? Is it a little better now? Okay, I'm really sorry about that. Anyways, so hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. I must have put my microphone down. I thought I was holding it or had it attached to my shirt, which is a common mistake that I make. Where did it go? Oh well. Anyways, so let me just dial back to what we were talking about. Some of the monarchs I was talking about. John Lackland lost all of England's land in England to the French. Failed to maintain. Basically, had to sell England to the Pope in order to prevent the Pope from continually abolishing church services in England. That's how unpopular he was. Bankrupted the country and was forced to sign the Magna Carta, limiting his power because of his extreme incompetence. So John Lackland, really a terrible king. If you're asking about the worst and best kings, Alfeo, I would also say that Charles VI of France, losing Paris to the English is one of the biggest embarrassments you can possibly get. Nicholas II refusing to reform Russia at a time it desperately needed it, letting Rasputin into his court, trying to rule as an absolute monarch in the 20th century, and then embarrassing Russia in the World War I, so much so that his generals decided to throw him out of power, and then he was eventually executed by the Marxists. Is definitely an example of a terrible monarch. Elagabalus turning the Roman palace into a giant orgy house. Definitely all of his stuff really, really, really bad. So anyways, yeah, those are some. So Alfeo, to answer that question, yeah, let me see here. How's it going? Ruben, hopefully you're still here. Thoughts on Che Guevara? Not trying to cause controversy, but just curious. So Che Guevara, obviously a revolutionary symbol for a lot of people. Most of the people I think who wear his shirts and wear his merchandise don't know who he actually is and don't know a lot about his background. They just see him as a freedom fighter in Cuba, which he definitely was, but he was also quite oppressive and restrictive. He murdered people who were different than him and anyone who disagreed with him. He was very brutal and savage in the way that he fought, and he had gotten this way thanks to Fidel Castro. And eventually Castro wanted to distance himself so much from Guevara that he allowed the Colombian, I believe it was the Colombian government with the CIA to find out the location of Guevara, hunt him down, and kill him at his mountain base in, it was Ecuador. It was in Ecuador. So the fact that his closest communist ally turned on him and allowed him to be captured and killed, Ruben, I think shows a lot about his character and how extreme he had become. So, yeah. Anyways, okay. Let me see. Was King Arthur a fictional character? Most likely. I think that there were probably some Anglo-Saxon kings who fought different Celtic tribes and established in the 5th century after the Romans left England. The Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes the Jutes and the Anglo-Saxon, the Saxons and the Jutes and the Angles migrated to England from Germany and and southern Denmark and settled the land and defeated the different Celtic tribes and united the kingdoms. And one of these rulers um, could easily have been King Arthur. So not exactly sure if that was King Arthur or not, but yeah, none of these. I think that it has a lot about history when we learn about different historical figures who are um, when we learn about different historical figures who have a particular mythology about them, who may or may not have existed. We tend to learn more when you have exaggeration and hyperbole and mythology being created. We tend to learn more about them via the legends, and we learn more about the culture around them. So we don't actually know a huge amount about King Arthur, and even if he existed, but we know a lot about medieval England and how it wanted to see its history and cultural identity stretching back 1,000 years, as they wanted to see their ancient history and their history after the Romans not as a time of savage warlords fighting each other for dominance and control, but as a regal time full of nobility, Christian chivalry, and behavior. And it reflects the ideas of people like Sir Walter Scott and others who wrote about this, more than it does reflect. It reflects the medieval frame of mindset, the chivalry that had been implanted by the church, the idea of lords and ladies, the feudal system that didn't exist in 500 AD in England at all. This was a medieval invention, mainly spurred on by the church, and really didn't get going until the 7 and 800s AD, when these countries became more formalized in their and more set in their ways. And England, for a long time, was behind the other European countries in creating a feudal system because they were constantly being attacked by the Vikings, constantly being divided by different barbarian and Viking tribes that wanted to settle them. And so rather than remember your country's history as one of Viking invasions, savage warlords, and barbarian tribes, you want to remember it more as an amazing time, a time when you actually have all sorts of regality and nobility going on. So it's a retelling and a re-identification of what England used to be. So Ruben, I don't know a huge amount about Pancho Villa. He's often considered a hero. He was a Mexican bandit and rebel in the early 20th century who led raids into the southwestern part of the United States. His activity against the Americans actually prompted the United States to become more invested in the idea of joining World War One, because the fear of Mexico invading the United States and getting the land back, the Southwest and California, really frightened President Woodrow Wilson when the Zimmerman telegram was sent, where the Germans basically told the Mexicans, invade the southern United States and we will give that land back to you. Because of that, that prompted the Americans to join the war. So without Pancho Villa and his raids in Texas and New Mexico, the United States may not have joined World War One, and and the Allies might not have won. The Germans might have won World War One because of that. So Ruben, that's basically. I don't know a huge amount about him, but I do know a little bit about his global and geopolitical impact. Quite a fascinating and interesting guy. So. Sorry, just taking a sip of coffee. Hopefully you've got something warm to drink. Hopefully you're keeping warm. Hopefully it's not too cold, and you guys can have a pleasant and celebratory New Year's Eve. And hopefully you are all have great plans and a lot of fun planned, and can stay safe out there. Now we're being told today is actually the anniversary of 5 years ago. The World Health Organization announced that there were cases of viral pneumonia coming from Wuhan, China. And that is where COVID-19 really gets its start. And now we're being told about bird flu. It seems like we might be headed towards another global pandemic. Who knows how we'll deal with this one? I'm glad you have fun plans. I'd love to hear about your plans, Kian. Okay. Are you serious? That'd be really cool if you did. What do you think the world would be like if the Germans had won along with their allies? Well, interestingly enough, World War One, if the Germans had won World War One, they would have probably demanded more land from France, significant portions of Eastern Europe. The Austro-Hungarian Empire would have been able to squeeze up more of the Balkans, and Turkey might have very well taken back Greece, and Bulgaria might have had a huge influence in Eastern European affairs, and Russia would become extraordinarily weak. And I don't know if the Germans would have allowed the communists to stay in power in Russia. They were both using each other at the end of World War One. The Germans hated the Imperial Germans hated communism, and the communists hated the bourgeois Germans. But they were using each other for survival. The Germans used the Russians to undermine the Bolsheviks, to undermine the Allied cause, while the Bolsheviks used the Germans and their supplies to continue to survive when their government was in peril, especially during the Civil War. So, in my opinion, the truth of the matter is that there would have been a lot of there wouldn't have been World War II. There probably wouldn't have been the Holocaust. There wouldn't have been the rise of Adolf Hitler, but there would have been a very aggressive and proud and self-vindicated Germany who would have squeezed up more land in France and Russia. And who knows what would happen to the United States if Mexico would have actually invaded the United States. I think the United States would have remained relatively uninvolved in European affairs and would have continued its isolationist policy without the involvement of the United States in World War I, without Woodrow Wilson's self determination for foreign countries, and without the creation of a League of Nations, the United States may have never gotten involved in World War II. So, interestingly enough, there could have been very well no World War II had the Germans actually won in World War I. Commander Ferdinand Foch, the leader of the French forces at the Treaty of Versailles, says in 20 years there'll be another war, which is an incredible thing to say. Well, Ruben, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for subscribing. But yeah, Alfeo, that's what I think would have happened if the Germans had won the war. So it might have actually been better if the Germans had won World War I, at least in the grand scheme of things. You probably wouldn't have had the Holocaust. Who knows what the Ottomans would have continued to do in the Middle East, however? Who knows what that area of the world would look like? I've never actually thought about it, but things might have been better in some ways, but they might have been more strained in other ways. And the European imperial system that had been dominant in the 19th century would have continued longer. Russia probably wouldn't have been an empire anymore, but Germany would have continued as an empire. The Austro-Hungarian Empire would continue to control Central and Eastern Europe, and you have the Ottoman Empire. World War I is where empires go to die. Those three empires would have probably stayed intact at the very least for at least another generation, and Germany might still be an empire today. Who knows how influential and powerful the German Empire could have become with all of its natural resources? Because throughout the 20th century, the whole question of international geopolitics is, where does Germany stand in everything? And after World War II, it's like, how do we keep Germany from doing what Germany has done twice before, causing world wars? So who knows? The Germans really had a horrible habit during the war of angering people through unrestricted submarine warfare. They got Argentina, China, Japan, and the United States involved in the war just because of their relentless butchering and bullying on those high seas. But they got close to winning, surprisingly enough. The inability of them to defeat the British Navy, the British naval blockade, basically starving them into submission, and the inclusion of the United States into the war, even after Russia was knocked out of the war, kept them from overwhelming the Western Front and the trenches like they wanted to, and instead they got overwhelmed and collapsed, as did the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So in retrospect, history always looks inevitable. It always looks like, yeah, this was going to happen this way. But the truth of the matter is that history is a completely unpredictable thing. It's all over the place, and it goes everywhere, and all sorts of things happen during it. And so it looks like it in hindsight, 2020, oh yeah, the Germans were going to be starved out. The Austro-Hungarian system was going to collapse after Franz Joseph, their long-reigning emperor, died, and the Ottomans would be destroyed by the British and the Arabs working together. That seems pretty obvious. It wasn't obvious to anyone in 1916 when people are dying thousands at a time for inches of land in Germany, in France, and Belgium, in the Western Front, the trench warfare. So, Antonio, have you ever been robbed at gunpoint? No, I have not. I'm very, very happy and proud to say that I have not been. What do you mean, does that have history? Do gay people have history? Yes, gay people have history. Look at the ancient Greeks. And yes, please like and subscribe if you're enjoying it. Lorenzo, great to see you. Want to know your opinion on the Black Hebrew theory. There are Black Jews. There is evidence that there are many Jewish communities in Africa, especially in Northern Africa. They're called the Mizrahim, the Sephardic Jews, or the Jews of North Africa and Spain. The Mizrahim are the Jews of the Middle East. But there is a lot of historical evidence to say that there are Jews in Africa. I wouldn't go any farther than that. The Black Hebrew theory basically goes into the fact that the Jews were originally Africans, that Jesus and his apostles were Africans. I'm not trying to say anything wrong. I'm not trying to say anything bad about any society or group of people, but the Jews were not ostensibly or initially black. They were darker skinned than I am for sure, but they were Semitic and Middle Eastern. Sabir is asking, what do you think about dual citizen Israel Americans, dual agent CIA and FBI? Yeah. I don't know about if they did that, if they were blackmailing and doing that. I know that the Mossad has had its fingers in a lot of pies, as has the CIA. You think of the Lavon incident and some of these other incidents in history where the Mossad basically acted on its own to undermine a particular country, even when the United States wasn't going along with it or allowing them to do so. So, Sever, I would not fully put it past them. It's never better to be under some power. And by the way, that's not to say, Saber, that I hate the Mossad or I hate Israel. The FBI, I love America, I'm an American. The CIA and the FBI have done a lot of shady things that are very questionable in its history, and so that wouldn't be any different with the Israel and its Secret Service. I think we should be fair here. It's never better to be under some power just so you don't have casualties. Yeah, that's the trade-off. What would have been the result? I think you might be referring to what I said about World War One AI. But the truth of the matter is, if the Germans had won World War One, there probably would be no Holocaust. But who knows how many Armenians would have been killed by the Ottomans in their genocide that the Turkish government does not acknowledge to this day. And why I just mention Germany? Is USA different? I mean, to some extent, yes. The U.S. has not initiated a world war. Do you think the U.S. and Mexico will go to war, I guess, with the cartel? I think that's a lot of bluster. I think the idea of invading Mexico to take out MS-13 is a lot of bluster. I think the United States will probably pressure the Mexican government through tariffs and other things, and lack of opportunities in immigration, which is what the Trump administration is banking on. I think they will pressure the Mexican government and the federales to take out the MS-13 rather than just turning a blind eye to them. I don't know if that's going to work or not. Was pinball ever outlawed in your state? No. Do you think the FBI or DEA have made trade deals with Mexico for all the leaders? Yes, absolutely. I think and this is an example, there is a long stream of intervention from the FBI, CIA, and DEA, and any other government organization in Central and South America. We were talking about Che Guevara a second ago, Ruben, and part of the way the Che got killed was the United States government, the CIA, worked with the Ecuadorian government and the Castro regime to basically hunt him down and kill him. And so there's been a long-standing interference politically, socially, economically, and pharmaceutically. The drugs flowing from those regions of the world have been a constant target by the United States, and a lot of the governments that the United States allowed to stay in place, like the Noriega government, I believe in Panama, which was a brutal dictatorship, was allowed just because they were not communists, and that is where the drug flow really starts and gets going. So as long as a government is not communist during the Cold War in the second half of the 20th century, the United States basically turns a blind eye to anything else they do. This includes South Korea, South Vietnam especially, and people like Manuel Noriega. And there's even a little bit of a slap on the wrist about Juan Perón. Basically, as long as you are not a communist, you can stay in power. In fact, my theory about Benito Mussolini, speaking about hypothetical history, just like we were talking about with World War I, is that if Mussolini had not joined Hitler or had surrendered earlier and basically told the United States, I will not be a communist, I will rebuild, I will do whatever you say, he would have stayed in power until he died naturally. The same thing is true with Francisco Franco in Spain, who was a fascist dictator, who was buddies with the Nazis, who the Nazis had helped put in power for the Spanish Civil War. But basically, Francisco Franco was allowed to stay in power because the United States approached him and said, will you allow communism? And he said, no, I am not a communist. And the United States basically said, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and allowed him to stay in power, which ironically was the same mistake they had made with the Soviets. They had assumed during World War II that the Soviets were their friends because they were the enemy of the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese to some extent. That had obviously proven not to be true. So that same foreign policy mistake was made in allowing Franco and Noriega and Perón to stay in power. And basically propping up these dictatorships at certain points because they were non-communist. The biggest scandal of Ronald Reagan's presidency, despite his many accomplishments, was the Iran-Contra affair, where basically Reagan made deals with the Iranians, who were supposed to be, after the Iranian Revolution, absolute enemies of the United States, radical Muslims who were sponsoring terrorism and who wanted the death of the United States, but Reagan was buying weapons to them and giving them to the Contras, who were conservative counter-revolutionaries against the Sandinistas, I believe in Nicaragua. And that almost ruined his presidency. So, anyways, let me see. Let me see. Hilarious. If you are I'm so glad, Kian. I hope you two are happy together. If you're looking out of World War perspective in the New Age, it would be quite possible that the wars that wars that were supported by USA purely for benefit could be a gasoline to the fire. Yes, I agree with that. I think the United States got cocky after World War II because it had done so much. In fact, today is the birthday of George Marshall, the US Secretary of State who organized the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe after World War II. The US rebuilt Europe and Japan and South Korea and all of these areas after World War II, partially to keep them from falling to communism, but partially out of some sort of humanitarian beneficence. But if you look after, but the United States got cocky and they got overtly confident, and Vietnam is a huge example of how they were humbled. So, oh, I'm sorry, Kim. Keep looking, you'll find them. Can you do research on directed energy weapons? It's used extensively on Americans for political reasons. They are mostly done by. Yes, I've heard about these weapons. They're extremely strong. They're extremely precise. I don't know if they're being used on Americans necessarily, Saber, so I'll have to look into that. I'm more than willing to look into any theory or idea proposed by anyone on my channel. So thank you for bringing that up. If you like what I'm talking about, what I'm discussing about world wars, the United States in the 20th century, I can talk about a bunch of history that you may want to learn about from other time periods and other places in the world. Please consider liking and subscribing, joining the Friendly Neighborhood Historians. It's really helping me live the dream. And oh, I'm sorry, he smells bad. But living the dream has asked, we place Pinochet in power as well as Batista. Yeah. Well, Batista is an interesting example. I don't know. Pinochet, obviously, we basically let Pinochet and Perón stay in power. As long as you hated communism, you must be a friend of the United States, and these human rights abuses will turn the blank eye to. We didn't understand that fascism was as difficult and authoritarian and as terrifying in some ways as communism. It wasn't as pernicious and perhaps not as violent, but it was just as repressive. And so we allowed Pinochet and Perón and Franco to stay in power, basically as long as they did what they could to stamp out communism. So, and if you look at communism in places like the Congo, where we overthrew it, and other places, communism does not have, the United States worry about the spread of communism was well founded because communism tended to spread, and it tended to copycat itself from Russia to China to Vietnam to Laos to Cambodia to all of these places to Cuba, but it usually has an expiration date. Its economic problems and its social problems, the society it creates, is not sustainable. The Soviet Union eventually collapsed despite its huge amount of continual extraction and resources. The Chinese modified their communist approach in the 1970s. The killing feuds in the Khmer Rouge were so bad that the communist Vietnamese helped them overthrow it. Vietnam has opened up its economy. So communism is not, the United States made the correct assessment that communism does have this tendency to spread and go everywhere it wants. But it made this horrible assessment that communism will last forever and keep on spreading and go everywhere when it has an expiration date based on its own internal inconsistencies and difficulties. So, YouTube AI test. For example, Syria could start conflict with Russia, meaning World War III. Same for Ukraine situation with Trump in power. That will chance, but still facts are facts. I'm not sure exactly what the chances are of World War III right now. I just think that if there is a World War III, Syria, Russia, Iraq, Iran, North Korea, and China have more to lose than the United States. And the thing that I'm talking about the Cold War a lot. Something that was very, very common during the Cold War was this acknowledgement that if nuclear weapons are used, both sides will be destroyed. And although the Soviets and the Americans both got close to using these weapons at times, what often stayed the hand was this idea that, wait a second, they're not just going to get destroyed, we're going to get destroyed. A world war, particularly a land war, could cause so much devastation and death, and perhaps the use of tactical nuclear weapons, that I think it serves as a deterrent. The nuclear weapons, according to President Eisenhower, that were being made during the 50s were a deterrent to avoid land wars in Asia and in Russia against the Soviets. So who knows? I just think that there's so much at stake. When there gets to be such high stakes, people actually start to cool down. In World War I and World War II, nobody thought the stakes were as high as they were. Nobody expected, although they promised and said they were going to do this. Other than the Nazis, no one expected 6 million Jews and 5 million Slavs, homosexuals, communists, and other groups of remaining gypsies to be slaughtered by the Nazis. Nobody fully expected that devastation to be that great. Nobody expected in World War I for tens of millions of lives to be lost, for all of these empires to collapse, and for the world to be forever changed and scarred by it. Nobody expected those things when those wars started. They expected the wars to be over quickly or to be at least a pivotal war. But now, with World War III, we all know the weight of what would happen if we have another World War. By the way, just for fun extra for you guys, I don't believe World War One is World War One. I believe there was a world war in the 1750s, the 7 Years' War, in which there was fighting in Europe, Africa, India, and the United States and Canada. It's called the French Indian War over here. But I believe that there was Russia, Prussia, Austria, Great Britain, France, the American colonies, the French colonies, the French Indians, Canada, India, and the African forts where the Europeans would basically pick up their slaves. All were fighting with each other. There was naval and land warfare, and there were colonies being involved in that. I think that parallels, it's not as big and global, but does parallel World War One and World War II. So I technically think that that was the First World War. Then the Great War was World War II, and World War III is the one with the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese. Just a little historical rant for me now. But anyways, have you heard about how when a new president in Mexico is elected, a cartel leader goes down and a new one is made? That's interesting. I don't know if it's that deep. I know there's the presidents in Mexico are not presidents in the same way the American presidents or prime ministers are in Canada and Germany and Great Britain. But there's a lot of that, and this is common in Central America and in other places of the world and in Africa. A president is almost tantamount to a dictator or or at least an extremely strong executive ruler. And I know that's the case to some extent in Mexico, so that doesn't surprise me, especially with the cartels controlling so much wealth and prestige and influence. They could definitely impact presidents, and presidents could impact them. If the CIA engaged in anti-democratic actions, then do you think that they did anything anti-democratic domestically? Oh, I think absolutely. If you've done anti-democratic things internationally, what's to stop you? And that wouldn't be the CIA, that would be the FBI. And the FBI kind of admitted to doing some of these things. I think that when you look at some of the shady things the government did, from MK Ultra, where they sprayed LSD, and they've confirmed this, on plants as well as in subway stations in order to see what the effects of LSD were on the population. The Tuskegee experiments, where they basically saw the effects of syphilis and tested it on only black men because they thought blacks were dispensable back then. Who knows? And who knows how deep and far this goes? And there's the possibility, as Living the Dream is pointing out, that the CIA and the FBI, which I believe if you're going to kill an American president and cover it up, you have to have multiple organizations. There's obviously that conspiracy theory that has become more mainstream over the years because more and more people don't trust that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Saber, can you talk about USS Liberty? Is that the ship from the Philadelphia experiment? I always get confused with USS Liberty. You'll have to jog my memory a little bit about that. Twism. I've been talking about communism a little bit, but hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Communism is a theory that actually predates Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, his patron, but basically the Communist Manifesto is the first major communist pamphlet and idea written in 1848 in Germany. It is basically a socio-economic system that believes that the means of production should be owned by the workers, and that there should be a worker state run by the workers, and that the state should control everything, and that everybody should work together for the good of each other and for the state. And the state, and basically society, is everyone working together. There is no one owns anything, no one has any money. The Bolsheviks in Russia tried to abolish paper money. They realized they couldn't do that. And it has been tried on numerous occasions in numerous places, and it was the most popular ideology of the 20th century in terms of being applied to new situations, and oftentimes led to repressive governments, dictatorships, and other things as people continue to try to force people who were unwilling to join the communist experiment. That's a very AI-like answer. I didn't get that from AI, but that's what I can tell you right now. And obviously, I can go into more detail about specific examples if you'd like. Nicholas Perron, that did us Argentinians a lot of damage. Yes, I know, and it's good to see you again. I'm so glad you're here, Nicholas. You had asked all those great questions about Javier Milei. Yeah, and I don't believe communism works either. And I go back and forth on the idea, has real communism ever been tried? Because that's a common tout from people who are on the left, especially the hard left. I do think to an extent communism has been tried and hasn't been tried because the fullest form of communism in a fully industrialized society couldn't possibly be tried because Marx expected communist revolutions in Germany, England, and France. They never happened. The workers never wanted it. So Russia basically had to force it through a agricultural society that was then rapidly mechanized by Joseph Stalin, and then you have the result of it being the impoverished, brutal, repressive society that George Orwell writes about in 1984, paralleling Stalin's communism. And then it's been readapted and reinterpreted in different contexts based on the social statuses. So it's been reinterpreted from being economic rich versus the poor to being the landowners versus those who don't have land, the farmers versus the versus the businessmen. All of those sorts of things have been used to reapply communism in different contexts and different ideas. And I've talked about woke ideology on the channel and how that basically takes communist print dialectics where you have one side versus another side and applies them to race, gender, and sexual orientation, as well as other things. Yeah. All systems have problems. I don't think all systems have the same problems. Gary Ford. Uh, Yeah, yeah, Gary, I like that comparison. It's a Hatfield McCoy kind of a thing because the truth of the matter is, if you actually study the history of communism and fascism, fascism was founded by a socialist. Mussolini was a socialist who became disenfranchised with communism because he felt it was too global and not nationalistic enough. And Hitler writes extensively about being a socialist, and all of them end up in forms of authoritarianism. Perhaps the United States' mistake during the Cold War that I was just talking about is in not conflating fascism and communism enough to basically to realize that both of them needed to be exterminated when they ran into it, which is why they allowed Noriega, Perón, Franco to stay in power when they probably shouldn't have, because they were just as repressive and authoritarian in some ways, although Franco a little bit less, than Stalin or Khrushchev. Communists do tend to eat their own. There's a lot of that going on. I mean, the Soviets and the Chinese turning against each other during the middle of the Cold War helped the U.S. eventually win the Cold War. USSR never achieved communism, nor did China. I don't think that Stalin or Mao would agree with you. It's the same Western capitalism. It really has every system has an expiration date because every system is built by humans, and that's why reforms to those systems are necessary to allow them to continue. What allowed American capitalism and Western capitalism to continue was modifications, workers' rights, unionization, the ability to unionize, collective bargaining, things like this. That allowed those systems to continue with checks and balances, just like a political government continues with checks and balances, democratic government. Yeah. So Jimmy, it could be that that World War III is already happening, but by my calculation, if there is a world war that starts in Ukraine or in the Middle East, it's going to be World War IV, based on my history. Let me see here. Capitalism has internal inconsistencies and its own destruction built in as well. There are internal inconsistencies to capitalism. There's internal inconsistencies to every system, but it's like I've often thought when it comes to democracy and what they say, democracy is the worst system except for all the other ones. So, yeah. War was kind of useless, in my opinion. Well, it all depends on what you're using war for. War is generally useless and leads to terrible, terrible outcomes. But what are the reasons for the war? Who are you fighting? Who are you standing up against? There is, in my opinion, some idea of a just war. Who are you fighting? Yes, I'm familiar with the World Workers' Party. I've heard of it before. And proxy wars are definitely part of the Cold War, to be sure. I tend to see things in terms of which system is individualist or collectivist. I think that's the main thing. I think, yeah, there's definitely a level of that and definitely a way people have. What do you mean have more to loss? If China stops production, all the West stops the car production. The truth of the matter is if China, the United States has the military backbone and the strength to defeat China. That is what I mean. So. Happy New Year from India. Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us, Mizra. Is it New Year's where you are? I know as much as I possibly can. I'm trying to learn more. Bro, what do you personally think about the Roman Emperor Caracalla, a good ruler? No. Caracalla, who is being lampooned and reinterpreted by Ridley Scott. I take it Ridley Scott brought you here, but I'm glad you're here anyways. Caracalla was not nearly as effeminate and effacing. He killed his brother Gatta. He was ruthless. He was cruel. and he was extraordinarily violent and abrasive. His greatest accomplishment is actually he built the longest standing and most beautiful, extensive system of baths in the Roman Empire. So he was an amazing architect who, like basically every other member of his family except his father, Septimius Servus, was assassinated because somebody else wanted power, and that was Macrinius, which is the story of Gladiator 2. So, but yeah, Caracalla, not a good ruler at all. I was talking about some of the worst rulers. He is one of the worst Roman rulers ever, for sure. Twism, are we going into a recession? I mean, we've been told this for several years, and the economy seems to be stabilizing in some ways. I think the reopening of the economy after the COVID-19 pandemic prevented a recession. So, Saber, can you talk about the USS Liberty's deliberate terrorist attacks? I would like to know what you're referring to because I think I'm blanking. I don't know everything, and I like it when people bring up topics I don't know because then it gives me something to research. It gives me some homework, and I come back knowing more. And hopefully, you join us knowing more. There are yeah, I can see that to be sure, Gary. Can you talk about the USS Liberty? And the Catholic Church in Europe gets richer. Interesting. Yeah, the truth of the matter is there is a lot of economic suffering and hardship that has been covered up, and a lot of people, and I think the political election of 2024, especially in the United States, was an opportunity for people to basically kind of revise where things were. I never thought I would see articles saying most Americans think the economy is bad and here's why they're wrong, but this kind of condescending, patronizing attitude turned a lot of people off from the party in power, and I think is why Trump got reelected to some extent. Oh yes, that's right. It's the ship. The USS Liberty was attacked by Israel. The Mossad actually tried to take it down, which you wouldn't expect hearing that the Israelis attacked a U.S. ship. But yes, I do know a little bit about that, but not that much. Why did the 7 Years' War begin? Was it a powder keg type thing with World War One? No, Burger King. The 7 Years' War starts because of the aggressiveness of Frederick the Great. There had been a war, I think it was called the War of the Austrian Succession, in which Frederick had challenged Maria Theresa, the daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor and Austrian Emperor, who they were the same thing. The Austrian Emperor was usually the Holy Roman Emperor, which the Holy Roman Emperor had no power. It was just more like a ceremonial title. But basically, Frederick the Great, the leader of the king of the Prussians, challenged Maria's right to be a ruler. He thought it was improper that a woman should rule the Holy Roman Empire. So he went to war with her and he defeated her in the War of the Austrian Succession and took this land called Silesia in Germany. And eventually Maria wanted it back, and that's what caused the war. Russia and France were on her side, and the British joined the side of the Prussians because they hated what France was doing. And actually, at first, Prussia was horribly decimated. And right before Frederick was about to surrender, the Russian Tsarina Elizabeth died, and her nephew Paul, who was Peter, who was a huge fan of Frederick, who was a German, gave in and allowed Frederick to win the war. In India, the French and the British pitted Indian rulers called Rajas in the declining Mughal Empire against each other to see who could gain as much land and influence. Off the coast of Africa, French and British ships were fighting each other because they were trying to control the forts where the slaves were exported from. And in America, in Canada, and the United States, there was fighting in what is now the Midwest and in Ontario and Quebec between the French and their Indian allies and the Americans and the colonial Americans and the British and their Indian allies known as the Iroquois. And so that's why it's called the French-Indian War over here. But there's fighting all over. There's naval fighting. There's local natives fighting. There's colonial people fighting. It's less of a powder keg and more of the Europeans trying to gain land and power. Eventually, the British win over here, and Frederick is able to defeat the Austrians in a surprise comeback. Yes, it's a stateless, classless society that according to Marx, you're absolutely right about that they can't seem to get because there's always a state and there's always a class. It's the Pareto principle. Interesting. So they attacked the ship in order to blame Egypt during the Six-Day War. That doesn't surprise me at all. It's a subterfuge attempt in a war that was launched on them and attacked on them out of nowhere that they somehow managed to win in just 6 days and seize the Sinai Peninsula. Yeah, well, that's true, YouTube. I agree with you absolutely. It's true that Russia mechanized at a much faster pace under communism, and I think Russia was a prime example of where communism fit only because Russia is not a place that has a lot of openness to liberal democracy and economic freedom. It hadn't been in any of its history. Most of the farming system that had been set up since the end of serfdom was communal. So there was definitely some space for this. But there was basically a forcing of industrialization in the Soviet Union by Joseph Stalin. So what was the human cost and the loss of human capital and physical capital because of this? What was the Gulag system? How many millions of people died under the Soviets? Lenin and Stalin starving millions of people at a time. There's definitely a huge amount of cost in collectivization, in rapid industrialization, in the 5-year plans. It is true that they were able to produce a highly mechanized society that somehow withstood the Nazis because they were able to produce at such a fast pace. But I don't think that Russia ever was really capitalistic in that sense. So, have you heard about the recent Neuralink chip implant patient? I do not know about that, Gary. You'll have to tell me about that. Thank you, Saber, for telling me about that. I appreciate that. Yes, that's true. Orwell was a socialist. It's very true that Orwell was a socialist, but he became disenfranchised with a lot of socialist pretensions, and he believed that socialism had been betrayed by Stalin. Yes, I do know that Orwell was a socialist. I don't know how much of a socialist he is by the time he gets to 1984. He certainly is still espousing it in Wiggy and Peer and Animal Farm. And I think he realizes that the socialist principles oftentimes lead to repressive governments, and he was horrified by that. The example in Yugoslavia is a golden age, is a legit strong country with their own production, so they were making money, people had housing and so on. Yeah, Yugoslavia, what they did well there under Tito was they got out of the Soviet influence and they created a balanced system where they were able to, so Yugoslavia is a good example. But the Yugoslavian government, through some light oppression, definitely more benevolent than Stalin, but definitely not non-authoritarian, under Josip Tito, who was a national hero, were able to keep the collective groups of people who had been fighting each other for decades, the different ethnic groups, from fighting one another. And because they were able to unite all the different ethnic groups in Yugoslavia, that was a good enough accomplishment to be able to get their agenda through. They did not stay communist, they did not stay together afterwards, and were broken into different states following Tito's death and the end of communism in Yugoslavia. Typically, these dictators, if you read about it, are able to hold together the system, but then it starts to collapse afterwards. I'm not misunderstanding Hegel. Hegel creates the dialectic about democracy and other things, and Marx reappropriates that into a communist narrative. Interesting. When time gets tough, people look for a king. In democratic countries, that results in elections of dictatorships from nationalist to communist. That could definitely be true. There's definitely this strongman stuff that's very, very popular. Someone's calling me. But there's definitely this strongman stuff that's really, really prevalent in the Middle East right now. If you look at most of the region, we just passed the death anniversary of Saddam Hussein. A lot of that region has always had a strong ruler. They do not have a democratic tradition or any sort of democratic influence. And so a strong ruler is definitely extraordinarily important for those regions of the world. Okay, sorry about that. I had to see who it was calling. I had to hear the phone ringing saying who it was. Anyway, sorry. So yeah, Berger, I think you're absolutely right that when times get tough, the tough get going, and there's a lot of co-opting by more dictatorial forces in different areas of the world who try to repress the rights of people. I think that's absolutely true because people want quick and easy solutions. If you look at the Middle East, strongmen have always been the solution there. From the Ottomans, Afghanistan was basically founded by the strongest tribe setting up a king. Iran has always had an emperor or a king known as a shah. It's only recently that Iran has gotten away from that and still is basically now ruled by a theocracy. So Egypt, ever since its independence from the British, has been a military dictatorship to one extent or another. So Burger King, I think you're absolutely right with what you're saying. Nathan is asking, any thoughts on Jimmy Carter? 39th president of the United States, just passed away at the age of 100, longest living president, 75 years married to the same woman, a Sunday school teacher, who stood up to the other Southern Democrats in Georgia and refused to stand up for segregation, openly celebrated desegregation. I think Jimmy Carter was an extremely great humanitarian, won the Nobel Prize for his efforts with Habitat for Humanity. A very smart man, a very classy man, very distinct, very likable and charming in his own way, just not a great leader. I just don't think that Jimmy Carter was elected at a time where he actually could have served a purpose that was beneficial to the United States. I think he ran into so many different problems and didn't have quick, easy solutions for them. And maybe the long game would have worked for him, but that wasn't what people wanted. Um, yeah. Uh, and as always, thanks for your comments. Also, I want to add that I heard what you said last weekend about Jim Nobley. I couldn't reply because I was washing the dishes. I'm glad you heard that, Nicholas. Thank you. What's going on between Afghanistan and Pakistan? I don't know exactly a lot of what's going on between Afghanistan and Pakistan. I know a little bit about what's going on between Pakistan and India. Something that Afghanistan I wrote my entire master's thesis about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a precipice place. It is a crossroads. It has always been extremely important for trade. The Silk Road ran through Afghanistan. Without Afghanistan, there'd be no Silk Road. The modern nation of Afghanistan did not exist until 1747. It was always this land that was kind of piecemealed and taken back and forth between the Safavid Persians or the Mughal Indians, the Delhi Sultanate. Timur built his Timurid Empire in Afghanistan. The Greeks conquered it under Alexander. Then a Greco-Afghan empire called the Bakhtari ruled over it. It has never been able to be controlled by a foreign influence for too long. It always kind of shakes off the dust off its feet. The British weren't able to do it. The Soviets weren't able to do it. The United States should have learned its lesson and did not. And during the Afghan War, which you might be referring to, Vishesh, is that the Pakistani government sheltered people in Pakistan who were terrorists from Al Qaeda in Afghanistan who had fled into their country, and Osama bin Laden was eventually hunted down in the Obama years in Pakistan, surprising a lot of people. Um, um, Yeah, YouTube, I think what you're describing there is not necessarily capitalism. It might be a proto-capitalism, but it's more of a mercantilism. Mercantilism was the idea that motivated the European kingdoms of the age of exploration and afterwards, where it was basically we have to get all of the resources we can, or we'll run out of them, and we cannot produce new resources or wealth, and therefore we're in constant competition, and and everyone is an economic enemy, and there's no room for free trade or partnership or cooperation. So. Living the dream, I wouldn't say the leftist policies of FDR save capitalism. I think there is definitely some truth to the matter that capitalism I'm not a laissez-fairist by any stretch. I don't think laissez-faire capitalism has ever even existed. But I think that some of those policies were definitely needed to be bulwarks. You can't have unrestricted capitalism. I'm not just arguing from a conservative perspective. I am simply saying that there is a balance there, and I'm saying that communism is an extreme that doesn't work. Um, so, thank you. Um, that's true. What war is the most underrated, meaning the most impactful but not well known? Would it have been the 7 Years' War? I would say so, because people should recognize it as a world war, and they did not, Burger. So I agree. Fidel, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Good night. Happy New Year, Ayush. Um, um, Well, I'm not saying that China is a communist country, at least not economically. The economic system has definitely changed, and Deng Xiaoping was a good example of how that change started at the death of Mao and afterwards. And I really think that Nixon opening up the U.S. to China and that economic ties meant there would be a cutting off and a slow but steady decrease in communist economic policy and activity. Um, Sabir, I don't think it's a genocide. I've talked about this before on the channel. I don't believe that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. I don't believe we can say that everything that happens in a war is a genocide. I think it's a horrible, horrible situation. I think it has to end as soon as possible. And I'm so sorry that the infrastructure of Gaza has been destroyed. And I think Israel is morally and financially responsible and liable and should rebuild Gaza. And I think Gaza needs to be rebuilt without Hamas as its main government, which advocates the destruction of the Jewish people and their state. I don't know why that is so controversial for me to say. I think it's a very fair perspective. Israel broke it. Israel pays for all the medical, all of the infrastructure, all of the rebuilding, and finds a way and shows in their beneficence a new side to them that the Palestinians in that region are not used to. And then we talk about, does the U.S. temporarily occupy it? Does Israel temporarily occupy it? What kind of government is built there? and how much, and I think that there needs to be a lot of generosity and charity compelled upon Israel for the sake of the Gazans. So, but I wouldn't really say dictatorships. If you know the situation, most of the population would vote Tito. He wasn't real. Yeah, well, he was a real feared man because he had helped them. He was the leader of the partisans during World War II, and because he had helped them throw off of Nazis, everyone thought of him as a great hero. And he was a war hero, and he was popular, and he wasn't as repressive as a Ceausescu or a Stalin, so that's how he got into power. So I would agree with you there. Yes, I would. Yes, living. I am sure that Tito was horrified by American propaganda. I believe America is. I think America is different and unique, and I think this rubs people the wrong way or the right way, depending on how they feel. Only because I'm not talking about American exceptionalism per se, but I'm saying America is unique in the fact that it is an idea. It is not a people. There is no an American person can look like me or look like anyone or look like someone who's completely different looking than me. America is an idea. And I think that separates it. And I think there's a distinctiveness that being English means something, that being French means something ethnically, that being Israeli means something ethnically, that being Indian means something ethnically, culturally, and historically. Being American doesn't have that same weight on it because it means something ideologically. Is it true that all systems have flaws, but since I can't help but see anything from the point of view of the individual, I always end up at the point where the problem is with representative democracy. It forces individuals who have other preferences to live under laws and regulations in which they do not agree simply because in our majority. Yeah, there are problems with democracy. Like I said, democracy is the worst system except for all the others. And the American system, which is often called a democracy, and every Western system is far more Republican, at least with a lowercase r, than it is democratic. The American system is a constitutional republic with democratic influences, and the British system was set up to be Republican as well. So, I'm doing my best to go through every single question. We're almost an hour in, and I only promised to do an hour, but I really love everyone and what they're bringing up and talking about. Even if you're disagreeing with me, I really love your contributions and your thoughts and your ideas. Please consider liking and subscribing. I don't think he's an anarchist. Yes, and Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. That's what Churchill observed when he was a war correspondent there. The British could never control Afghanistan. They could only control their foreign policy, and eventually the Afghans got rid of them. Interestingly enough, I've seen pictures of the Afghan uniforms in the 1920s, and they're all European in style. So the Afghans definitely love to take from the people who come in and try to take them, and that could be something that the Taliban did in taking U.S. Weapons and supplies in 2021. Let me see here. Apparently, Taliban has declared a campaign against the Pakistani state. That doesn't surprise me. They're definitely too democratic and too liberal. I mean, and Pakistan has had its own problems with radical Islamism. I mean, Benazir Bhutto, the first female prime minister of a Muslim country, was killed by extremists because she was a socialist. I mean, so that's interesting. And that's with Pakistan and India still fighting over Kashmir. So I'm going to have to look more into that, Vishesh, but thank you for telling me about that. I think you are trying to argue logically the only thing that makes sense is laissez-faire capitalism. However, just like communism, it still has blind spots. I'm not arguing for laissez-faire capitalism. I'm not saying laissez-faire capitalism is the only thing that makes sense, Berger. I think that capitalism with restraint makes sense. I think that I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. I don't think that laissez-faire capitalism, like pure communism, has ever been fully experimented with or tried because it is so impractical and is so off the walls. One on the right, one on the left. My main history dude, my main running man. So great to see you. It'd be interesting for you to find out why this is coming to pass. I would imagine it's because of the Taliban's expansiveness and their disapproval of the system in Pakistan. That would be my best guess. The thing is, I don't think the communists or socialists should live it. So I like your back and forth living the dream. And Nicholas, thank you so much. Democrats held up 150 pieces of legislation and hurt USA during Depression, then in 10 days passed them. And Yes, that's partially true. I don't believe that Roosevelt solved the Great Depression. I don't believe that it's an economically sound thing to say that the New Deal policies actually solved the Great Depression. There is an argument that they made it worse. I think that the mobilization of the military industrial complex and the creation of the military industrial complex with the government contracting with large production companies like Ford and GM actually is what got the US out of the Great Depression in 1940 and 1941, and then drafting everybody put unemployment at zero. I mean, in some ways, it's not dissimilar from the 4-year plans in Germany that basically put everyone in the military and got rid of the depression there, which was what Goering did in the middle of the 30s. So a lot of people give Franklin Roosevelt a lot more credit than he deserves. He obviously did a lot of great things and is an incredible speaker, but I think he's an overrated president. Putting him in the top 5 doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. He navigated very well. He was a charismatic man, but he operated as a dictator. So if you want to talk about Franklin Roosevelt as a U.S. president, you have to talk about him as potentially the first and only U.S. dictator. Although you could argue that some other presidents fall into that category as well. Congress. Interesting. I'm not sure about that, Sever. I wouldn't know exactly what Thomas Massey is talking about. I try not to pay attention to what he says. I am interested in Yugoslavian history because my great grandfather fled there and moved to South America seeking a better life in the late 1800s. There's a large influx of immigrants into South America from Europe, in Eastern and Central Europe, in the late 19th century, Fidel. And I've talked a lot about how the Italians, huge numbers of them, migrated to Argentina. And that's why Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, looks more like a European and is probably of Italian descent. It wasn't just Nazis and fascists fleeing there. I don't know a huge amount about that. Yugoslavia did not exist in the late 1800s. It was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and many people from that area of the world fled and immigrated to the United States and South America. And a reason for that is because the Austro-Hungarian Empire was extremely racially stratified based on the different ethnicities. So depend if you were Austrian or Hungarian, you had more precedence than Croats, Czechs, or Slavs. And so they were extremely class conscious and extremely ethnically conscious. And I think that would be a huge reason for people who are not necessarily Austro or Hungarian or German speaking to flee into another place. That would be my best working educated guess on that, Fidel. I haven't studied it especially. Special Prosecutor Smith was never conferred by Congress. Okay, I see we're talking about the Trump investigation. My second grade teacher told me that that FDR took as out of the Great Depression and is the greatest president in American history. Your second grade teacher is wrong. I wouldn't say that living the dream. I think it relies on some of that sometimes. I think that there was. I think it wasn't that saved that World War II saved capitalism. I just think it economically boosted the United States out of the Great Depression because the market producing things always boosts an economy. What differences between Chanka, Sun Tzu, and Machiavelli have you observed? Also, is there a Roman Greek philosopher who wrote so extensively about war and statecraft? I think Plato wrote a great deal about that. I think it was Plato who said in war, fathers bury their sons instead of sons burying their fathers. Machiavelli definitely seems to think that a dictatorship is needed for political stability. Sun Tzu obviously starts it off. I don't know about Chanakya, but I think that Machiavelli is more interested in government. Sun Tzu is more interested in warfare, and I think that Plato would be your best source to go for there. Nicholas. Okay, well, you guys, I love the talk you guys are having. I really appreciate it. And I've actually caught up to the chat. Well, that's incredible. Yeah, the stands, by the way, the reason those countries are stands, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, there should probably be a Kurdistan, is because stan refers to the people, the nation. So the Afghanistan is literally the nation of the people and country of the Afghans. So that is how those all work. Yes. I love it when people come onto my channel just to troll. It's just fantastic. But anyways, I hope you guys, we've gotten over an hour. That's how long we usually go here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. I saw a lot of new faces today, and I hope that you enjoyed what I was talking about, even if you didn't necessarily agree with everything that I had to say. I really appreciate all of your commentary and support and for helping the channel grow. And consider liking and subscribing. I'll take a few more questions if anyone has them. Yep, they do drive up engagement. Social entrepreneurship does sound kind of fun. I so appreciate that. I so appreciate that, Clino. Please like and subscribe if you think like Clino that this channel is amazing. You guys make it amazing. The discussions, the questions you guys bring, the ability to test my knowledge and to expand my knowledge, it just means so much to me. Yeah, Roosevelt definitely was at least socialist light. He was definitely interested in socialism. What do you think about Israeli soldiers taking advantage of prisoners and then demonstrations to allow it? I think that's awful. I think that's absolutely unacceptable, and I think they should be defrocked, and the Israeli military should be investigated. Just like Hamas should be totally destroyed for parading women down the street, who they had clearly also done that to on October 7th. It's a Sanskrit word. That's interesting. I know right now India is trying to change its name back to Bharat based on on the ancient Sanskrit name because it doesn't want to be associated with the Indus River, which is in Pakistan. No, I don't know about extended mind fury. H-1B visa, yay or nay? I'd say yay because I mean I think that it's important I think it's good when immigrants work in an economy, and I think it helps an economy grow. And a lot of the time, immigrants do jobs that people aren't going to do otherwise. The difficulty is when you have an economy that is recovering. How do you make it recover when you are dealing with large amounts of immigrants who make low wages? There is a little bit of Russian. There's a little bit of and there's American. His mother was American. His great great grandmother on his father's side was actually a lover of Queen Anne, a woman, Sarah Churchill. No, you're not You're not trolling. Live a dream. You are not trolling at all. I appreciate so much what you've had to say and all of the questions and ideas you have raised. I really appreciate you. So yes, hey Ian. So please be sure to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed what you've learned about and the questions that we've answered. Hopefully you enjoyed this discussion. We're here every Friday and Saturday evenings, taking your questions, answering your Q&A about history. Do you think it's good that an American making $200,000 a year training his replacement who is working for 70? No, I don't think that's good. I don't think that's good at all. So I guess in that way I'd be opposed. I'm opposed to I'm avowedly in favor of legal immigration, of making immigration easier. Go check out my live stream lecture about Ellis Island. It was 98% of people who went in through Ellis Island were approved, and it usually only took a couple of days. And if you were sick, you stayed for a couple of weeks. And if you were an anarchist, you were sent home. It was that simple. It was that clean. It was that easy. Immigration should probably be not necessarily that easy, but it should be a much easier and much more streamlined process. That would be a huge deterrent to illegal immigration and to porous borders and questions of people coming into a country when they haven't been vetted and no one knows who they are. Would Thomas Jefferson be described today as a heretic? I don't know how he would be described as a heretic politically. Religiously, he might have been. He was definitely described as that way too. I'm reading a really good book right now on the presidents, and Jefferson was described as a godless atheist because he was a deist who didn't believe in the Christian Bible and who rewrote the New Testament to demystify it, taking out all the miracles of Jesus, including the resurrection. And for 18th century America, that was too far. Where do you study teach? I currently have a master's degree. I am a teacher. I'm an American, as you've probably figured out. I keep my location pretty private and secret. I mean, even my wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny, who always runs these chats so well and was here at the very beginning. I think he might be busy with New Year's plans because he's over in the UK. He put in the social media handles. You can follow me there if you want. But basically, live the dream. I don't disclose my personal information. He doesn't know my personal information. People don't know my name. I am not the Friendly Neighborhood Historian, but I just represent the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. And we got started with this back in February. You can go and look at the first videos I ever made when I didn't know the difference between a 15-second short and a 60-second short. And I've been so blessed this year by all of you and by all of the contributions and participation on the channel, people coming in, asking great questions, liking and subscribing. And joining the Friendly Neighborhood Historians. So you are the Friendly Neighborhood Historians, is what I like to say. Yeah. Argentina with the government, I do not feel coerced. Oh, interesting. Yeah. All government, to one form or another, is coercive, I guess, in some ways. But yeah, so this is what we do here. We talk about history. I do shorts. I do daily history, what happened on this day in history. I do who passed away on this day and who was born this day. I've already uploaded all 3 of those videos today, so you go and check them out before you go and celebrate New Year's. Found out what happened on New Year's Eve in history. Today is the day that the Soviet Union fell apart. Vladimir Putin came to power in Russia. The Panama Canal was given back to the Panamanians, and the World Health Organization recognized the first case of coronavirus, which has changed all of our lives. Um, okay, thank you, James. I will be sure to do that. To put two shades on the scones behind you. Oh, yeah, those are old, so I don't like putting sconces on them. I have a sconce on that though, so thank you for that. How did Thomas Jefferson get elected despite his outspoken religious views? Because he was a celebrity, and most celebrities then were philosophical and political. They didn't have entertainment in the same way. And Jefferson had written the Declaration of Independence. He believed in individual freedom and responsibility, and people had turned against the Federalist Party because they had basically been split over a debate of going to war with France between John Adams, the president, who didn't want war with France, and Alexander Hamilton, obviously from Hamilton, who wanted war with France and who was trying to control the party. That split allowed the Democratic Republicans to gain power, and Jefferson was tied in the 1800 electoral vote with a man named Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr obviously is one of the most hated people in American history because he tried to lead an invasion of Spanish California and Texas, by the way, and for this other reason. Alexander Hamilton, who hated Jefferson, pushed the Federalists in the House of Representatives, who controlled the House of Representatives, to vote for Jefferson as president because when it's tied, the House of Representatives gets to decide. So the House, because of Hamilton's influence, pushed Jefferson into the presidency, pushing out John Adams, and Burr was so furious that he eventually turned on Hamilton and shot him and killed him. So he was elected because of his political insights, because he believed in individual responsibilities, and he believed it was a political revolution that he had undertaken in 1800. And he was a well-known figure who had written the Declaration of Independence and served his country very well, and a lot of people really loved him. And he advocated the government not being involved and people doing their own thing, and that was popular, especially in the western areas of the country that were growing at that time. So that's why he won. Let me see. Take a trip to Edinburgh. I would love to go to Edinburgh. I love Scotland. I love its history. In my opinion, and I love Great Britain, I love England, I would live in Great Britain or in the UK if I didn't live in America. So if I had a choice of where to go if I left the United States, I'd go to the UK. But in my opinion, and this is no offense to Ireland, Northern Ireland, the Isle of Man, Wales, England, all beautiful. Scotland is the most beautiful part of the British Isles. Do you think it's likely most people don't know his views, don't know his views on religion? No, because the press was vicious and cruel, and when they were and everyone was calling him a godless atheist, he got that accusation all the time, and people were very well aware of his religious views at the time. I don't know how informed the American populace was, but when your main form of entertainment is the press, you don't have televisions, you don't have movies, you might have shows once in a while or plays, but when you're relying mainly on reading to entertain you, you're going to learn a lot more. You're going to be more informed. I'm so glad, Live the Dream. I'm so glad you're sharing with him. Given the limited access to the information he had. They were limited in how much they knew, but the press was actually pretty virulent during Adams and Washington and Jefferson's time. And it was so bad that Adams had tried to restrict the power and the access of the press in what was called the Alien and Sedition Acts, where basically the press couldn't speak out against an American president, and Jefferson called him a king and a dictator for this, and that sent the two men into a spiral of hatred that wouldn't end until well after they were both done with their presidencies, when they became friends again, because these men had written the Declaration of Independence together. Yeah, they do not. Nicholas, I've read about that, I've heard about that, and everyone, as soon as they hear a German or Italian surname in South America, thinks of World War II, and there was some of that went on, but not all the time. Um, what do you think about the narrative, the Israelis land grab as a security buffer, but Russians? Look at Russia and look at Israel, look at their size, and then you'll see why people have a trouble believing that. Russia always believes it needs land buffers. This is part of Russia's cultural and historic identity. If you would like, I have a Substack-friendly history, and I wrote an article about Russia's cultural identity and ominous behavior compared to the Europeans and how they try to see themselves as distinct from the Europeans. I wrote extensively about that if you want to check that out, because I was writing about the death of Rasputin. And Rasputin kind of is a microcosm for Russia's mysterious sinister lack of connection to the West. And so the truth of the matter is, Russia has always felt itself needing to grab more and more land to be as powerful as possible and to be safe from foreign invaders. This dates back to the Mongol invasion in the 13th century. And so, because of that, Ukraine, which used to belong to Russia, they believe is theirs for the taking. Zank over. Interesting. Did Burr ever regret killing Hamilton? No. I did. Burr never regretted killing Hamilton. He tries to raise an army to invade Spain, and is actually arrested and eventually released, and is basically divorced. He gets the divorce a year before he dies in New York, and his wife hires Hamilton's son as her lawyer in a big ouch move. What do you think about the narrative? I answered that already. The women, oh yes, behind their front, and perhaps no better example than Abigail Adams, who was one of the first women to advocate women in politics and universal education for women. Absolutely. Deborah Sampson, the American Mulan. I made a video about her. Really fascinating woman who got involved in the American war effort, dressing as a Continental regular and coming off as an American. So it's really, really cool. Anyways, so at this point, I'm going to close this out. We've gone 15 minutes over. I really appreciate everybody's participation and joining us. I've got to go back and keep reading. I'm doing a recording of the Christmas Carol as a holiday bonus narration thing. And that is a painful and arduous process. It's going to take me several days, but hopefully I finish by January 6th, the last day of Christmas, and have it uploaded by then. But I'm going to go back and work on that in a little bit. But I hope you all have a wonderful New Year's Eve and a wonderful Happy New Year. I will see you in 2025. Has there ever been a time and country that utilized weaponized rights movements like trans, BLM, climate change in a similar way to the Democrats during the past year? Yes. Mobilizing different sorts of outrage and political movements in order and co-opting them for your own political gain is nothing new in history. But yes, anyways, I will see you. Oh, Seth, you're here. It's so great to see you. I hope you guys have, yes, easy does it. Be safe out there. I hope you guys all have a blessed and wonderful 2025, a happy new year to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you. Hopefully you all join me on Friday for our next live stream Q&A. Ask me anything. Oh, Seth, you just got here. Well, better late than never. Do you think the war was last question I'll take here. Burger King's asking you, do you think the war was avoidable on the West side? Was there anything the West could have done other than giving up land that would have appeased the Russians? Do you mean the Ukrainian war? No, because I believe the national identity of the Russian people is so tied into their foreign policy right now that their biggest goal is to get that land back because they believe that Ukraine belongs to them. I believe Putin believes it in his heart of hearts. This is what he's been working on for 25 years. And so I don't know if the West could have appeased. I don't think the West should appease. However, I would say that Putin is relatively weaker than the Nazis and Hitler. I think that the war should end, and the war should end very quickly. And who knows what that would look like. Both sides are willing to wheel and deal. We'll see what the Trump administration and other foreign powers are amping to do in the new year. But I hope everybody has a great new year and a happy 2025 to you all. I lift a glass to you. Thank you for making it a great year for the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Please like and subscribe. Tell everybody about it. Follow the Substack and the social media handles and the pinned message. Just have a great and wonderful New Year's and the rest of the holiday season. And I will see you hopefully on Friday for our live stream Q&A. Check out the channel short and long form content and all the videos we have there. Really appreciate all you guys. The Hatfields and McCoys, I've done a little bit of research on them. Gary, maybe I'll make a video in your honor about them because I like to make videos for people who just subscribe to the channel. But when you've got nearly 6,000 people who subscribed, it's hard to make videos all the time. But thank you so much. Really appreciate all of you. Is Ukraine to Russia what Mexico is to the U.S.? Yes and no. That's all I'm going to say for now because Ukraine actually was Russia for a while, the Kievan Rus. I'm answering that as a bonus. But yes, take care. Thank you. Really appreciate all the love and support. And I will see you guys very, very soon again. Check out the content on the channel. And I will hopefully see you all on Friday. Happy New Year to you all. Happy 2025. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel signing off.